Welcome to This Endorian Life, a Star Wars podcast from the Radio Meanwhile Network. My name is Steve Rudd.
I'm Nick Gunning, and this time our journey through Star Wars Vintage brings us to the world of droids.
Droids. Today we are discussing C-3PO number 1, The Phantom Limb. This one-shot comic was released on April 13th, 2016.
That's right.
Man, almost 10 years ago.
I know.
10.
Jeez, that's crazy. That's crazy.
For our cast and crew, this issue was written by James Robinson and illustrated by Tony Harris.
Collected in the hardcover version of Journey to the Force Awakens Shattered Empire, which is how I originally read it. Though, as we learned, the digital version or the softcover version does not have this in there, so you really need that fancy hardcover. It's also available as a single issue or in the Marvel app, which I read it for the second time in the Marvel app, and that was fun. Here's a fun fact. It was adapted as a playable level as one of the DLCs for LEGO Star Wars The Force Awakens, so you could actually play through the events of this comic.
Wait, so the Force Awakens, not the Skywalker.
Not the Skywalker saga, no, the original one. And it stays really true to the comic, and it's funny because this is such a sad comic that's weird to play that game because it doesn't really jive with it, but it's true. This was adapted into a video game, LEGO Star Wars The Force Awakens, which is a great game. I really like that one.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That is a very fun fact.
Yeah. Thank you.
Like
Thank you. Featured cast member today is James Robinson, who is the author of this issue. He has a legendary career with DC, including a storied run on Starman, which people went crazy for in the 90s. And Eric, from previously on X-Men, he and I read this together because it's a legendary run that neither of us had read. And I don't get it. Like, I was hoping to really like it and be like, wow, what a new, cool, and it just, I don't know. I'm not here to beat up on James Robinson, but I do not like Starman. But I do like some of his work. My favorite of his work was the ongoing New Krypton storyline in the pages of Superman. So this spread across several Superman titles, Action Comics, the Mon-El books, and it was about like a new, or like Kryptonian sort of coming back and a new Krypton world like emerging. It becomes this whole battle. And it was a really long, it's like 7 or 8 volumes, so a very serialized story written primarily by James Robinson, and that I do recommend. I was surprised to learn that this single issue is his only Star Wars work.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, it's such a weird, I don't know, it's a weird pull.
Obscure one. Yeah, like, who can we get to write this? Oh, James Robinson.
Yeah, we'll get James Robinson, yeah.
Not like, I don't know. Or maybe I wonder if he went to them and he's like, guys, I got an idea.
I don't know.
You got to explain the Red Arm.
I don't know that he's done a ton of, I think he has done some Marvel work, but he's primarily like DC, so it's not even like, well, Marvel, is a Disney product as is Star Wars, so I really don't know how it happened, but, I'm glad that it did. I like the issues.
All right, let's get into it. Uber detailed plot of C-3PO number 1, The Phantom Limb. A ship carrying a crew and several droids crash lands on a desolate planet. One of the droids is our very own C-3PO. The surviving droids escape the burning heap only to begin arguing amongst themselves about who should be in charge. Even the First Order droid, Omri, their prisoner and reason for the mission to ascertain the location of Admiral Akbar, inserts itself into their conversation. Squabbling about experience and background, Omri brings up the moral question of allegiance for a droid. A droid could work for the Resistance and then be captured and wiped and continue to work for the enemy with no recollection of ever helping the Resistance. Distracted by their quarrel, a massive swarm of giant spiders attack them. PZ-99, a Class 4 sentry droid with experience in the Battle of Jakku, begins opening fire with its arm-mounted blaster, and VL-44, the security droid with its small side-mounted blaster, joins him. Before a massive spider can finish off the Class 1 medical droid, 2-Med-2, the construction droid CO-34 shreds it with his massive mechanical arms. The droids all manage to climb to safety as PZ-99 draws the spiders away, sacrificing himself. Or itself, I should say. Again, Omri, the prisoner protocol droid, argues morality with 3PO when they all stumble upon an impassable tar pit. Not quite, though, as CO-34, the construction droid, transforms itself into a bridge. It literally goes construction. While crossing, a tar pit monster grabs 2 Med 2, crushing it in its jaws. The droids race across, but C-3PO's arm is caught by another monster's tentacle, ripping it off his shoulder. Armless, C-3PO makes it across with Omri and VL-44. CO-34 is too damaged and slowly sinks into the pit. Once across, the droids are then attacked by what looks like giant dragonflies. Unfortunately, the small Class 1 security droid VL-44 is carried off, leaving only 3PO and Omri left. Tar pits lead to desert wasteland as they head for a presumed First Order homing beacon. Omri equates his previously erased phantom memories to C-3PO's now phantom limb. It begins to rain acid, and the two arrive at the beacon, taking shelter under a crashed First Order TIE fighter wing. The problem is the rain will destroy the beacon, and surely them as well. In a moment of pure friendship, Omri transfers the location of Admiral Akbar to 3PO and steps into the rain to activate the beacon. The acid rain melts off Omri's outer coating, revealing a red primer. Another phantom memory stirs. Omri falls apart on his return, limbs falling to the ground. A time later, Poe Dameron arrives to rescue 3PO in response to the beacon. The two leave the planet, and 3PO loses all who were with him, except for one of Omri's red primed arms. Safely repaired, BB-8 admires 3PO's arm, who states that even though it affects his aesthetic, it reminds him of his friends. Roll credits.
Roll credits.
Man,
Yeah, it's heavy. It's heavy. It's sort of.
It's a heavy one, yeah.
When you watch it again, I mean, like reading it, it struck by how it's kind of like it's like horror movie situation where like you keep going and you're like losing somebody at each turn.
Yes.
You know, it's the part in Force Awakens where, which I can't remember where you stand on Force Awakens, but I still really love Force Awakens, and I wish we continued on in that trajectory.
I liked it.
I'm happy with Force Awakens. Like I could rewatch that movie anytime. But when C-3PO has the whole line about "you probably don't recognize me on account of my red arm," that just cracked me up. But I never was like, "Oh, I must know what happened." You know, I was just kind of like, "Yeah, stuff happens. Time passes." You know. So when I read this, I was like, "Oh, this is silly." But I ended up actually really kind of liking what it's saying about the character, and I feel like C-3PO gets more character development here than he did throughout the entire run of the Droids cartoon and spin-off comic.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it was, you and I feel like our generation does not care as much about the red arm because we've exhausted the what's with the silver chin.
Yeah.
What's with the silver leg,
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, okay, he's got a red arm. Ha. He's also got a silver leg. We get it, I thought it was funny because it broke up that scene really well, right?
Good
where
comic,
this is like, oh my gosh, like you're like, oh wait, I guess like Han and Leia, like I guess they're like haven't seen each other. Like, are they divorced? Are they with each other? And like, there's that like tension. And then he's like, oh, you probably don't recognize me because of my red arm. And it's just like, oh, like they break that tension effectively.
Yeah, it is a nice moment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So thinking back to when we covered the Vader Down book, you really haven't read any of the Star Wars comics from that era, right?
No, I've read like the OG Star Wars comics from like
old school Marvel era.
Or Dark Horse. It might even be Dark Horse era. Right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, Dark Horse. Dark Horse had a long run as well. Well, this, as I said in the Vader Down episode, like this era when the Disney Marvel stuff happened, Disney Marvel Star Wars stuff happened, Star Wars comics really exploded, and there's a cool Princess Leia comic, like Lando gets a comic. Poe Dameron has an ongoing series, and the Poe Dameron series is fun, but it struggles from make any drastic changes to these characters because the movie is still going on, you know?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of fun Star Wars comic stuff coming out at this time. And this still is pretty different because it's just such a character piece for, a character who's a lot of people's favorites. I mean, the droids are iconic. And I really do feel like it gives him a little bit more agency we're used to C-3PO having. And I think you see that again a little bit in Rise of Skywalker, when he makes his decision to, I guess, spoiler alert, to allow himself to be like reformatted to save them. Like you
Yeah.
see a little bit of like the brave C-3PO come through there only a couple of times. So I remember liking this when it came out, and revisiting it really didn't dampen that for me. I mean, what did you think overall?
I mean, I liked it. I think what they were getting into was like, ooh, this is good for like a graphic novel to
Yeah.
go through, not like a 38-page swivel
Yeah.
stand type comic.
Yeah.
And then they kept coming back to it. This was an interesting thing to explore, I thought. And because
Yeah.
it was too short, I think they made a few mistakes because it was
Okay.
because it was cut short. Like there were times where they were like, oh yeah, this and that, and like the morality of it. And then it was, well, that's just my programming. And it's just like, okay, well, is it based on morality or is it your programming? Because you can't call it morality or what's good or bad if it's your programming, because then it's not necessarily good or
Gotcha.
bad. It just is what it is.
Yeah. Right.
Red is red and blue is blue. You don't get to decide that
Yeah.
it's kind of purplish. No, it's either red or blue. You're
Yeah.
you're a robot. So there was a few, to me, I was just like,
Well,
technically,
in what you're saying is kind of reminded me of a Star Trek problem, that happens a lot. It's like trying to
yeah.
tell stories about Data, like, can he feel, can he not? Is he showing emotion? Is it just programming? So, I mean, that's the thing that I don't know that even Star Trek really delves into quite deep enough, but I definitely take your point. I see what you're saying there.
Yeah.
It does have to be kind of one or the other.
There again, there's that happens a lot in Star Trek with the whole Data thing. And this, they even brought up the term, like, I think Omri said that we do have to think from a sentient point of view or something like that. Our tasks require an extra degree of sentience. And I was just like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, what? Like, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, because they kind of are, right? Protocol droids are like the custom like translating, customs,
Yeah.
decorum, like chivalry,
Yeah.
things like that. A protocol droid would know all those things, and so it's not just
Yeah.
translating, is what do these people believe, what, can I
Yeah.
bow? If I bow, will they be insulted or impressed, like things like
Right.
that. So there is an aspect of what they do is based on the customs, and they might have to make that moral decision, but it's still in their programming. But I just thought it was an interesting, like,
Yeah.
oh man, we are dancing around like this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Data is different because he's programmed to learn. I don't know if C-3PO is necessarily
True.
programmed to do that, right?
Yeah, you're probably right, but I think the thing that makes C-3PO and R2 unique in the history, especially like once the prequels flesh this out a little bit more, is that they are two droids who were meant to just be service droids who have not had their memories like reset or rewiped or reformatted ever.
Ever,
And
yeah,
like
yeah, for a long time.
clearly
Yeah.
that's like the protocol. You remember in A New Hope, Uncle Owen is like, all right, erase their memories and let's get started. That was just like the thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's the Zahn books, somewhere in the old expanded universe. There was a whole thing about how R2 really could only interact with Luke's specific X-wing because the X-wing's computers and R2 had grown together in this way that like he could no longer fly just a regular old dumb X-wing, and Luke's X-wing couldn't work with a default droid. And I always thought that was
Yeah.
kind of an interesting thing that they did in the books, that it's like these are computer programs who were meant to have really kind of limited short-term function, who have just been basically on since,
Yet haven't restarted.
What do you see,
right?
60 years or whatever, like more than that.
Yeah.
Over the course of the three trilogies. So this, what you're saying too about the sort of the cultural aspects that they have in here, it reminded me of that Droids episode. Maybe it was The Great Heap, I don't remember, where there was like a Droids hangout. Do you remember that? Where it was like the droids weren't working or whatever. It was just like a little droid's paradise, like
that was the
R2-D2 in
heap.
a hot
Yeah, it was
tub.
like the droid harem.
Yeah, it was the heap. Yeah, the droid
Yeah,
harem.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I was thinking of that in this episode because that's the only other time when I can really think about them touching what is the droid culture, Like they don't really get into that in other places. It's like the Great Heap and this pretty much delve into that. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I liked seeing all the different types of droids that were there. I liked them all kind of having their own part to play.
Yeah.
I had a good time with it.
I thought they did well too at having different perspectives, right? Like the construction droid was just like construction. And they're like, oh, okay, very, very basic, right? Then the medical droid, when Omri was like, well, you don't know if you've been like wiped. You could have been like healing people from the enemy. And the protocol droid made a good point of it doesn't matter. That's not even sides are not even in my programming. My programming is to heal. So he doesn't see it as in, I'm part of the resistance, you're part of the first order kind of thing. He's just heal. And so like really the only two that had issues ended up being C-3PO and Omri. And because I mean, well, not differences, but the two that thought differently were the two droids that technically were at odds with each other. Right. One of them was, they say like, oh yeah, he is the prisoner. So I guess they captured him because he held information or knew how to get information on the whereabouts of Admiral Akbar, which you kind of had to piece together. But like, I thought that was really cool that it kind of ended up every other droid really didn't give a crap about anything that Omri and C-3PO were talking about. And they ended up passing away. And because then it's like they realize that, well, it really is just us two. We are unique, even though we are on the other side. And it reminds me of like watching the Band of Brothers series from HBO where the guys talk about like, I don't know, that I might like the German guy. He might like fishing. I like fishing. We might actually get along. In real life, but I don't know that, because we're just both fighting the war. Like he's just a dude and I'm just a dude. And that's like an interesting and refreshing perspective of like the morality of it that like you might actually be really good friends, but you're not because your masters or whoever has programmed that into you. And it's like an interesting thing. That's why I was like, man, this is not enough. This 38 pages is not enough to even explore this aspect. I just think it's a cool idea, and I'm glad he did it.
Yeah.
But it also, for me, it takes away from the red arm. Like, I just want, I don't know. Like, when I saw that, I was like, whoa, this is deep. Whoa. Now I don't even care about the red arm. Now I really all I care about is like the droid morality aspect. It's like almost. I don't know. That was just like for me. I was just like, "Oh, this is actually."
No, I get it. I get it. It's like they kind of dropped a gauntlet and like, "Oh, think about this really interesting thing," but either give us more of that or don't give us any of that.
Yes, exactly. Like it could have just been them trying to escape, and then the arm.
It sounds like we've kind of got to your Oak moment. So, would you like to say what your Oak moment is?
Yeah, mine is the moral quandary takes away from the story rather than reinforces it, right? That like it literally was, I completely forgot that this was a story about how he got his red arm. And when Omri was like, oh yeah, red primer, I was like, oh yeah. Oh, he gets his arm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. This is about his arm.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh my gosh. And like, and also, I think there were times where their conversations felt like, ooh, did we miss something? Like I went back and looked at the page numbers and I was like, oh man, it feels like there was a conversation that had happened slightly before this. It almost seemed like they're when they got back into those conversations, they were it was a very sudden and jarring way of doing it rather than like, like two people are like, hey, how's it going? What's your name? Oh yeah. What do you do for a living? Not like, hey man, what's up? Have you ever cheated on your wife? And you'd be like, whoa, like, dude, like at least, like things like that, like getting deep into stuff, like questions. Yeah. Like, there has to be questions that happen before you would, enter into a conversation like that. So it just seemed like, oh man, we're missing context, or maybe there was more pages and they just kind of condensed it. And that just kept making me think like, man, this would have been great as like a, not 100, but like, 90 page, 80 page,
Yeah.
solid graphic novel would have been great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's mine. What about yours?
Negative. Uh,
Negative.
that's
Yeah,
hard.
I
I
know.
mean, I was pretty in it. I did not enjoy the art. That I felt like kind of took it away and made it a little difficult at times to like follow what was going on. The overall format of the book, I didn't particularly like the non-traditional panels and stuff. I felt like just didn't quite gel with the kind of story that was being told. What like your Kavark moment? I mean, I did that doesn't bother me as much, but
Mhm.
it does feel like they maybe spent a little too much time on it when ultimately it wasn't really the point. It
Really?
wasn't really
Yeah.
like what it was about. So, but that kind of rolls into my Ichiwawa moment, which is the end with the resolution where Omri decides to sacrifice himself and set off the beacon before it's destroyed so that they know how to come and rescue C-3PO. He says, I had this one mission. Nothing in my mission, nothing in the rules set for me say that you succeeding means that I have broken a rule. So it's
Mhm.
like he plays a loophole.
Yeah.
Like he sticks with his programming, but he finds a loophole in his programming. And I just think, given everything that's come before, that's kind of an interesting way to bring it to a close. So I liked that. What about you? What's your Ichiwawa moment?
Mine was I really liked the part when C-3PO was like, "Oh yeah, there are like little things that I remember here and there." And he remembers like actual aspects and was like, and he references like, yeah, being in like an arena, not
Yeah,
with my own body. And I thought that was really interesting. And he's like, oh yeah, that's that scene from episode
yeah,
2 where he's on the head of a battle droid. And so
right.
I thought that was like, oh, that was cool to
Yeah,
like be able to kind of call back certain things that had happened and really place this in that kind of reinforces this story into the Star Wars universe. When you do that, you anchor it,
yeah,
and I like
yeah,
things like that. It's not, I didn't feel like that was a member berry because it wasn't just like something in the background. It was it was
right.
aspect of the story that was relevant, comparing the phantom memories to C-3PO's phantom limb, which I thought that was
Mhm.
interesting. I
Yeah,
that part I wondered about that too, about how like, yeah, when you wipe something, you're not necessarily fully wiping, right? When you delete everything off your computer, it just turns back on again because
yeah,
you didn't delete everything, you just deleted what was in
right.
the hard drive, but there's a partition in the hard drive that stores like the operating system and stuff like that. So there might be
Yeah,
aspects of things that are corrupted into the operating system that like, yep, go ahead and wipe them, and you're just wiping the memory, but the operating system is still there.
yeah,
That's why it's just like, oh man, this needs a book. Like you can't,
yeah,
you can't
yeah.
do
I
this
get
to me,
that.
man. Like this is a gold mine. Disney and Marvel Star Wars are sitting on a gold mine here of like really exploring this aspect of the droids. I don't know. I just feel like
Yeah,
that's very relevant to today too, So
I don't recall any R2D2 references. Do you remember any? I don't think so.
no. No, not at all.
Because that was something with Force Awakens where like, well, the whole sequel trilogy until R2 kind of pops back into it. That I felt like maybe was missing just a little bit, like him having some sort of like, I used to have a little friend or something, and you
Yeah.
don't really get any of that. So, I did kind of miss that. But overall, I feel pretty positively about it. How many yub nubs would you give this one?
I like this one. I'd probably give it a I don't want to give it too much. I don't know. It's like a 4.25. I enjoyed it. There's not
Okay.
much wrong with it.
Yeah.
It more just annoyed me that like, oh man, this is some deep stuff, and I know I'm like halfway through. um,
Right.
and you know what's funny too? I went back and I scrolled real quick through the comic, and you're right. The color is like sometimes it's very purple, and then the next page is very blue, and the next page is very greenish, and
Yeah, we
sometimes
just can't with the
C-3PO's
colors in these droids comics, no matter what era.
I feel like that you're right. That does bring it down a little bit for me. That was distracting. So 4.25, but like it felt like everyone was killed off too quickly, Right, and that's how it also could have benefited from more
Yeah,
pages, where you didn't really care too much. That did bother me, that they just died off, like in 3 pages, 3 droids had died, and it was just like, "Oh, man, geez,"
Yeah.
like, at least span it out, you know?
It does have a bit like I wonder if there was another version of this where they went for more of a horror vibe, because I really could see that happening. But I think they were going for kind of a tender moment at the end. And I think, like you said, with C-3PO remembering Geonosis and all of that, it's you kind of getting the sense of like, this dude has seen a lot.
Yeah.
And he's just a little droid who is not made for these times. So yeah, I think I'm rated a 4 with it.
4?
I liked it. It
Yeah.
was fun. I also like playing the level in Lego Star Wars Force Awakens, so I recommend that too.
That's really fun. I gotta find that now. I gotta rent I could
Yeah,
rent it
track it
from the
down.
library. I could do that.
Yeah, I'm always down for a library plug, so thank you for that. And my library does have a copy of it, so
Oh.
depending on where you are. But we are. I shudder to even say this, but next time we'll be back on Endor with Ewoks number 14, King for the Day, and that is the final issue of the Ewoks comic book.
Final issue. Man.
Final issue. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Who would have thought?
Ewoks 14. Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Man.
And after that, it's on to Life Day, and we've got our annual Life Day guest booked, and everything's looking up.
Oh yeah. And our guest is excited.
That's right. Mr. Jesse Riles, who we always have on this podcast for Life Day. I don't know why we do it, because again, he's not great at it. He's got a bad attitude.
He does. It's because we wanted to torture him with the first one. Now I feel bad that like we got to bring him on every time.
Yeah.
But
well, and it's the holidays. It's a time to be giving. I think so. We got to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Give him the benefit of the doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a generosity of spirit, I think, is why we have Jesse on our Life Day episode. So that'll be happening before you know it. So we'll see you next time with the final issue of Ewoks.
Yeah, I'll see you then. This Endorian Life was brought to you by the Radio Meanwhile Network. Other shows on the network include 9021 Here We Go, 90s Music Got Me Like, and previously on X-Men. Share your thoughts on this and upcoming episodes by following us on Facebook at Endorian Life. And please rate, subscribe, and share the show wherever you get your podcasts.
It's a trap.
It's a trap.